Hi everyone, welcome back. So in this video we're going to start implementation of the image classification API that we talked about in the previous video. So you can see here that I have a new folder called image classification, which is empty. Okay, so we're just going to make a new folder to work in, and then we're going to go in and start doing the usual stuff like setting up the environment and the Docker Compose Docker files and all of that. Okay. So first of all, we're going to go into image classification. So I'm going to go into desktop and then image classification. And then as you can see, it's empty. So there's nothing in here. ls basically shows you what's in the folder. Okay, great. So the first thing is we want to have a Docker Compose file. So I'm going to do touch docker compose.yaml. And then I'm going to click enter. Let's see if I can maybe make this a bit bigger. Okay, so that's better. So touch docker compose.yaml. And then the second thing is I want to do two directories, one for the database for the users and one for the web application or the API. So I'm going to do make directory web and make directory also DB. Okay, so just as usual. Now I'm going to go into web and then I'm going to touch a Docker file because I need a Docker file. And I'm also going to touch requirements.txt. So requirements.txt. All right, and then I'm going to go back. I'm going to go into database, so CDDB, and then I'm going to also touch Docker. I'm going to touch Docker file. Okay, so now I have the Docker file in there. Now I'm going to go outside, and then I'm going to open all of this in Atom. Okay, so I can edit it. So sudo atom dot input my password, and it should be good to go. So we'll wait for a second for Atom to open. Okay, so now we have the folder here, as you can see. So the first thing is let's first write the Docker file. It should be fairly straightforward. Now we've done it a couple of times. So version is 3. All right, we have several services. The first services is web, and we can build it from dot, or no commas here, so dot/web. So the Docker file of this service is here, dot/web. Okay, now there's also the ports. We want to open some ports, and then it's going to be mapping 5000 into 5000. Okay, we're also going to put links because I want to link it with the database, and then I'm just going to put DB. Now I write the service for DB, which is build. I'm going to build it from dot/db. Okay, so that's the Docker file for databases here. All right, so this should be straightforward. We've done it a couple of times already. Now let's go back. Let's go into the Docker file of DB. Right, it should be only one line, which is getting from Docker Hub the image for MongoDB. So I'm going to write from Mongo, then semicolon, and then 3.6.4. Now, if there's a newer version at the time you're viewing this video, then you might use it. Usually, Mongo doesn't change the API that much. Okay. Now we're going to go to a Docker file for the web, which has a couple more lines of code, right? So the first thing is we're going to, again, we need Python, right? We've been talking Python all this time, so we need Python. And then we're going to change the work directory to /user/source/app. And then we also need to copy the requirements. So copy requirements.txt. And we also need to run pip install and then no cache directory r and then requirements.txt. Okay, so we're installing the requirements, which we're going to write in a few seconds, and then after that we copy the files from here, from this folder, into the work directory, which is at /user/source/app, and then finally we run command python and then app.py. So we're running the app.py, the file app.py. So actually we forgot to add this here. So I'm going to go quickly and go into web, and then I'm going to touch app.py. So I'm going to add the file app.py. So after it's done and installed all the requirements, it's going to run app.py. Now for the requirements, we're going to need a couple of things, and you're going to see that I've introduced a couple of new ones. So we're going to need Flask as usual, and Flask RESTful, because that's how we, program our stuff or our API. And then we also need PyMongo to access the database. and then bcrypt for the passwords. But then this time we're going to add some new stuff. We're going to add numpy, and sometimes people call it numpy, okay? So you can choose whichever pronunciation you like. And then we're also going to choose TensorFlow, which is the deep learning framework or library that Google developed. And then we're also going to change requests. So what are these? Well, NumPy and TensorFlow work together, right? TensorFlow mostly needs NumPy arrays, okay? So if you want to run TensorFlow, you can think of NumPy. We're not going to use NumPy here, but you can think that TensorFlow underneath it needs NumPy, okay? So we're just going to add it as a requirement. Now, TensorFlow is where we would load the model that was already trained to do image classification on the NumPy arrays that we're going to be feeding it, okay, on the images that we're going to be feeding it. Now the final thing is requests, and if you remember, requests is going to be used to, because the user is going to give us a URL, right? So HTTP and then something .jpg, right? So the user is going to give us a URL of the image. What we need to do is to download this image and to save it on our device, okay? So the way we do this is using requests. So requests has something called requests.get, okay? So it has a get function, and you basically give it a URL, so HTTP and then something, so .jpg, and then what it does is it downloads this image for you automatically, and you can access it. So if I do r is equal to requests.get, then I can say r.content, and then I have, or r.content, and then I have whatever I downloaded it from this link, okay? So we're going to use this to basically download the image, and then after we download the image, we're going to use TensorFlow to predict what the image is, and then finally we're not using NumPy, but TensorFlow is using NumPy under the hood to do some of the computations, okay? So hopefully, let's just delete this, and this is a request with an S, okay? So let me just maybe zoom in this for you, it might be better, okay? All right, cool. So now we've written the requirements.txt, the Docker file, and the Docker Compose files, okay? So now what's left for us is to start to implement the app.py file, okay? So we're gonna stop here, and in the next video, we're going to start implementing the application, and with time, I'm going to show you how we're going to go to the Google official website on GitHub for the TensorFlow, and we're going to download the model. We're going to put the model in our, we're going to download the model and put it in our web so we can access it. If you remember, we did the same thing to NLP, so we added it here so we can access it from app.py, okay? So yeah, hopefully this made sense, and we're gonna stop here and we're gonna pick up in the next video. So until the next video, happy coding.